I'm an occupational therapist here at Beaumont School District, and I'm excited to learn what you discovered in our caseload. So here's Cody.
All right. That was my stakeholder. My name is Cody Cotton. I'll be presenting about efficiency in school-based OT practice. And defining efficiency in school-based practice, what I worked off of was service models and efficiency with time management. So let's go ahead to the next slide. Some background. Service models, how we're going to define those are as foundations for the therapeutic process. And since we're in a school district, we're using the educational model. So within that model, we look for strategies to increase functional outcomes in the school setting, and this is the basis for our service delivery methods. And our two methods that are currently used are the caseload and the workload. And the caseload is the most accepted and understood service delivery model right now. It's primarily a model built on numbers and not always outcomes. And the workload model is a model built on work activities which are directly or indirectly targeted towards school populations requiring OT services. So workload for us will look at work tasks and activities that we do throughout the day. And the purpose of this project, right over here, is to discuss preferred and effective means of service delivery in occupational therapy. So we're able to look at priorities and where we're using our time, and to reveal concerns and barriers to efficiency in school-based practice, and to propose methods of workload implementation to improve outcomes for all students based on the fullest scope of the occupational therapy domain, which is what we want to accomplish. We want to be able to practice as fully as possible. So the problem that we've identified through a needs assessment, we have increased or increasing caseloads, concerning time and prioritization factors surrounding caseloads, the caseload service model. Caseload service models are prescribed a numeric value over a service value. And overall OT goes underutilized, resulting in reduced efficiency and satisfaction in practice and poor student outcomes. So the methods that I used was an exploratory study conducted using a convenience sample so that I could get more practitioners within the region that we're in. So I was able to survey 5 districts total, and one of those happened to be out of state, and that actually allows us to compare what our region's differences are compared to another district. The survey methods I use are a 10-question Likert scale, and that was a scale of disagree to agree, reported caseload numbers, reported time spent per assessment, follow-up questions, and email communication. And these are our survey questions that I used. You guys take a moment to read those over a little bit if you want to. These are based on time utilization, cost considerations, and if we're practicing as fully as possible. Next. And these are my follow-up questions that allowed us to look at a little bit more of the numbers and numerical values that I associated with our use of time and priorities. Oh, sorry. My findings, okay, so let's go ahead and click next. 77% of respondents felt they had a say in practice, so these are pretty positive findings. Continue. 55% felt that cost considerations positively affected practice. And lastly, the data reveals mostly positive perceptions of administrative support in practice. So it shows that we are at least being supported financially in the things that we're doing somewhat. So overall practice perceptions, this is where we have a pretty big difference. Let's go ahead and click next. 77% do not feel that they're practicing within the full scope of OT practice. So that's a pretty staggering number. 44% either agreed or felt neutrally that they positively impacted the community in which they practice, and 55% felt that they were able to effectively meet their caseload. So what it kind of shows is that we're able to meet a caseload, but we're not practicing as fully as possible. So we're working hard to meet the numbers, but not necessarily working hard to practice as fully as we possibly can. So that's what those figures are kind of showing. All right, next. Time considerations. 66% of practitioners disagreed or strongly disagreed when asked if they had time for indirect service practices. So this, for us, would be travel, preparation, and interdisciplinary meetings, everything surrounding service delivery. Practitioners, and this was 77%, felt that they did not have enough time for assessments, meetings, besides service provision. So it's another staggering number. It just kind of shows that we're focusing on areas outside of service delivery. And while many felt that their time was effectively utilized, 50% disagreed. So that was a little bit mixed, but overall we're not utilizing our time as effectively as we possibly could. So averages in school-based OT. According to survey data, assessments took a mean average of 5.6 hours to complete, and that range topped out at about 12 hours for some. Local education agencies conducted time studies indicating that documentation may take up to one full workday for therapy practitioners within a full-time schedule. So within a 5-day work week, we're documenting for at least one of those days. Individual caseloads were a mean average of 50.9 students, and that topped out at 80. So the range was 30 to 80 students per caseload. And next. District caseloads were a mean average of 180.2 students. And that one topped out at, I believe, 400 total in a caseload, or in a district. So important factors in caseload management before we go over workload management. So caseload size positively correlated with those who reported a feeling of burnout. So we can see that as the caseload size increased, it states here 33% of correspondents, those with a caseload above 58 students reported that they did not see themselves in their current position in the foreseeable future.
So are you just saying like 58 is kind of like the threshold? Like, is that kind of what the data is?
It's kind of what it's indicating, is that as it goes up, people feel more burnout and they feel like they don't want to be in that position any longer.
But only for those that had 33% of those that had over 58 students, or 38%?
Just 33 of all correspondents who took the survey felt that, or if they had over 58 students in their caseload, those practitioners did not see themselves in their current position in the future, the foreseeable future.
So I can't remember the survey questions exactly. Was 58, was that like a number you provided, or you're just...
That's the numbers in general. So if somebody had a caseload of 58 or higher, so if, for instance, if one individual had a caseload of 80, they did not see themselves in that position for the foreseeable future. So
right.
That.
So what this is saying is 33% of correspondents, that is, those that had a caseload over 58 students.
Yes.
So that you're saying there were none that had students over 58 that felt that they were not going to stay in the foreseeable. So everyone who said that they were not going to stay in their position.
That is correct.
Everybody
above 58 or 58 or above did not see themselves in their current position within the future, foreseeable future. So in one study, staffing levels and realistic caseload were revealed to be an important determinant for job satisfaction, so that's just in general. And also, while practitioners felt cost considerations positively impacted practice efficiency, a greater average, 66%, believe cost considerations often negatively impacted practice.
I don't remember the cost considerations question. What was...
So the question was, do you feel that cost considerations positively impact practice? That was one. And then the second question was, do you feel that they negatively impacted practice? So more actually responded negatively, or saying that 66% felt that cost considerations negatively impacted practice.
So the way I interpreted cost considerations was, like, do you feel like you could use more money to better provide
equipment, resources?
Right.
That's kind of what I was focused on with that one. I based it off of that.
Okay.
And a lot of the time, it's a good way to look at how administration is managing costs as well. So that's kind of where I was focusing with that. So overall, retention and satisfaction positively correlate to adequate staffing, cost, and caseload considerations. So people felt more positively. They felt that like they were practicing more within their scope of practice, and all these other things that went along with adequate staffing, cost, and caseloads. Workload transition, this is kind of how we get there. So practitioners are already in transition, but may not be practicing as fully as possible. So only one respondent relayed that they were performing strictly direct cloud services, and this was the individual in Arkansas. And this individual had a caseload of only 30 students, so they felt very positive about the way that they were practicing, and they didn't use any collaborative methods or consultative. It was strictly pull out direct, and there was only one correspondent, and it wasn't within our region. All other practitioners reported that they used mixed or fading service methods based on age and context. So everybody else was using collaborative, consultative. So we're already moving towards trying to use different models in the first place as caseloads increase. That's what the data is kind of showing. All right. And most practitioners reported that they used a yearly model. So this doesn't necessarily correspond to what we're doing right now, but this is what most practitioners are using within our region. And the reason for that is it lends more control to the practitioner over time use. And one article actually presented that at the beginning of each semester might be a better time to increase direct service minutes and fade throughout the semester. So we're trying to position ourselves within the classroom at the start of the semester and get more of our service minutes at the beginning of each semester and solidify whatever objective criteria that we're using to accomplish whichever goals.
So does that mean that, for example, their minutes are going to be the same throughout the year, but that you kind of front load it and like maybe do weekly 30-minute sessions for a few months and then fade to 20, 10, et cetera?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
And just wanted to go ahead and say that a practitioner with a workload is more productive, and how that's going to happen. Next slide. First off is time considerations. The survey revealed that assessments alone expend over half of a workday, and that's not including the documentation or anything. So, or it may be a little bit, but looking at documentation, we're still expending over a half workday with assessments, and then a full workday with documentation. Cost considerations. High caseloads result in increased turnover, consequent increased contract expense, and training, etc. for new employees. So we're actually looking at increased costs, and if we're focusing on more numbers, then we're not actually utilizing our time as effectively. And overall, we're just aiming for improved practice. So a Texas school district reported improved quality of services, increased collaborative opportunities, and improved ability to identify students needing services, as well as more appropriate service recommendations. So within the workload model, you're actually able to look at these things and focus on those over the numbers, over the minutes. And a workload allows a look at all work practices rather than just service delivery. So we're able to prioritize and kind of know where we're putting our time rather than focusing on just meeting those numbers. We're actually looking at where our time is expended. And that's a big point of the workload. So in phase one, roles and responsibilities need to be discussed in reference to practicing within the full scope of OT. So phase one is the starting point for how we apply this. This is where we actually need to collaborate more and figure out what roles we have within the districts and where we want to be. What's our overall vision for where we want to be. Also is who is going to be involved, and what we would prefer is all service providers, so OT, PT, SD. And also to begin a scheduled monthly team collaboration with all therapy practitioners, stakeholders involved if possible. However, we can record and do whatever it is we need to do because of the time considerations. And then lastly, we need to develop a system of program advocacy. Relaying that change is occurring. So we need to actually put out pamphlets, media, everything that we can to relay that we are changing our style of work, that way that at least teaching staff and maybe parents understand that we're moving to a different model. In phase two, you can go ahead and click through that. This is a workload example based on a time study. So if we were to perform a time study Monday through Friday, this is just one example of one day after we've done all of our activities, something that we might record to just show where our time is going. And this is going to be a reference tool for later after we kind of audit this and see where our time is being used. So it displays all activities oriented towards student outcomes, and it's to be completed for at least 1 week, but it can go on longer if necessary. So as you can see, I'll be working at 2 different schools this day, or I will have worked at 2 different schools this day, rather. 8 to 8:30 would be intervention, preparation, documentation, 9 to 9:30. So this is sort of a utopic view of how a day might go. But, you know, obviously it's not going to go perfectly like this. And, you know, as we go on, this would be like the ideal type of activity, scheduled preschool teacher instruction. So early intervention, things that we can focus on in the future. Practitioners will group activities and tasks into categories. That's phase 3. So now we're looking at grouping all these tasks together and defining what they are within specific groupings. So these might include, but aren't limited to, direct services, classroom training, meetings, documentation. And then lastly, phase 4, we need to do a data analysis in order to reveal percentages and time spent in various categories. And we want to use the data to reveal strengths, weaknesses, and overall needs. And we also want to consider what is optimal productivity given the data. So we're auditing what is our timesheets, or that time entry form, and seeing where we can be more productive and where we can put more time to accomplish our own types of goals. And also we want to reveal a need for modification or improvement in practice or staffing needs. So this is where we can also begin to advocate for increased staff. And we want to determine opportunities for advocacy at this point as well. So after we've actually looked at where our time is going, where our priorities are, we can establish this as a priority as well. So different things that we should be doing to maximize our scope of practice. And then this is the big part, meet, present, and collaborate. Go ahead and click through a couple of those. So upon discovering issues and areas of need, we can now implement a continuous improvement protocol. And so that could be PDCA or anything that might allow us to continually improve in the way that we're using this workload. So at this point, we want to communicate any change in priorities based on data. So if a percentage, because that's how we're wanting to measure each of these groupings, is by percentage. What percentage of time are we using within each grouping? How can we change our priorities to decrease certain times or certain percentages in certain groupings and increase certain other areas? And we want to brainstorm solutions. So we want to determine who is responsible. So with me as a CODA, I might be more responsible for the caseload delivery, because caseload doesn't disappear with this model, but it just looks at every other aspect of what we're doing. So with me, I might have a focus in that area, intervention. And when should it be done? When should this goal be accomplished? Whatever we're trying to achieve. We have to set expectations at this point. And these could all relate to context prevention, any area of potential improvement. So overall, we need to apply these methods, and with the application, we need to conduct a time study biannually at least to determine continuous improvement methods. And these are all areas that are generally unaddressed in the caseload model. So cost, feasibility, and urgency. A transition to workload has very little additional cost to implement. So overall, the cost will be in documentation and the amount of time spent on our new system of documentation that we're developing. And research already indicates potentially improved retention, so we'll be saving money in the long run. The model can be implemented easily using current documentation methods. So we have Google Drive, Docs, and Spreadsheet, and Google Calendars has a weekly type of schedule that we can use to document our work activities throughout the day. And also seeing as current service delivery methods, collaborative and consultative, and times, monthly, yearly, weekly, are already lending themselves to changing models, it would be beneficial to administer a workload model as soon as possible. So we're already in transition. We just need to position ourselves to use our time as fully as possible so that we can practice as fully as possible.
So, in my mind, a benefit of, or why a caseload model might not be working is, like you said, it only takes into account the number of minutes that you're spent with, oh, perfect question, with a student, and doesn't take into account all of the outside time that requires
That's right.
you to do that. Which in my mind implies, okay, there's not enough time and my district is not taking into account how many hours I'm actually spending to really do my job. And yeah, just changing from one model to another, from caseload to workload, okay, yeah, that's all easy. Okay, I've documented this and this is the actual amount of time I'm spending, but really how much time am I spending at home, on the weekend, before and after school, outside of the designated work hours, and really isn't a solution to this is to show that we actually need more staff, and that does cost the district more money.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of...
So this is also a way of increasing accountability for where our time is being used, and will allow us to, it's a form of self-audit where we can present this information to whoever might need to see it, stakeholders who can provide us with more staff. It basically will allow us to access more staff in the future as long as we see a need and then they see a need through the workload model that we're presenting.
Okay, so you're saying that this is a means to get hopefully more staff so that we're not so overworked and spread thin, and get the children better services. I think
Yes.
that's kind of
That's the overall goal, is better
Yeah.
service and practicing more fully within our scope. So we're using our scope, like our scope of practice, that is our overall vision and mission within this tool, and trying to get there through whatever various means. So this allows us to advocate a little bit better for our profession because we're seeing where all of our time is going, and so can administration see where our time is going.
So really, at least at this point, it's a way to document your time, to like bare bones way to look at it. It's not necessarily changing the number of students you have based on comparing all of your other duties and time spent.
That might be a long-term goal of the model, but the model itself just is trying to focus on, yeah, where's our time going, and can we devote our time to something more effectively within our scope of practice, and mostly for outcomes for the kids, actually. So even though we're trying to practice as fully as possible in the school, we're also trying to achieve goals along with that. So it does not get rid of caseload in practice. It just allows us to look at all other areas and increase accountability for what we're doing, and basically act as a tool to advocate for us in our profession so that we can increase our numbers if necessary. And also looking at the caseload numbers, this would be a tool for us to at least show them that we might need more numbers based on retention rates and things like that.
Yeah, so I mean, because currently a lot of times when you're talking to other OTs or whatever, you're like, oh, well, how many kids are on your caseload, right? That's kind of like the ruler of, oh, how difficult is your job, how time demanding is it, is how many kids are on your caseload. So is a way then to measure, to quickly give the information using a workload model is how many hours per day, per month, per, like, what is that kind of?
So the recommendation within the model is, it's still, we have control and power over what we're doing, and that's what we're trying to accomplish with the model, is trying to at least give us a little bit more authority over where our time is going. Because if we're using all of our time for, or you guys using all your time for assessments, and the minutes don't necessarily match up to the amount of time that it takes to perform those things, and where administration is able to see that, then they'll be able to see that, oh, we need to change, and we'll be able to see that we need to change the way that we're delivering service on a yearly model or a monthly model or whatever it may be. So, and then they'll also be able to see the need for staffing if that's the case as well.
So like a quick way to point that out to them without all the, specifics that we could find, would it be like, well, here's the number of hours I'm paid to work, and then here's the number of hours I actually work to do all of these things related to my job? Is that kind of like
So it'd be using that Google Calendar like you were saying.
Yeah,
and,
so
and then documenting throughout that calendar, throughout the 24-hour day.
Yeah, and we would want to establish a lot of these things, sorry to interrupt, through collaboration. So if, you know, if we wanted to say 8 o'clock to 4:30, this is the time that we are documenting our time spent on these specific things, and then have an accessory portion of time spent for home documentation that we input, or, you know, just that kind of information. Yeah, we could do it, but it's all based on collaboration as well. So what's all of our staff, all of the therapy department going to agree upon for this model to happen, especially for us, because I think for our caseload, it should start with the OT department specifically, something like this. And even though it does take a little bit of extra work to perform this, at least we would be able to have accountability for where our time's going and present that to administration as a tool for our own advocacy, for our own for more staff, or just generally how we can practice more fully within our profession.
Mm-hmm. And are there any studies, or do you know of any thing for how long this, like if we want to start this new documentation system, not, you know, treatment session documentation, but documentation of how our time is spent, of how much time that would take each day to account for that?
There's nothing specific. Time study is just, it's time spent basically documenting how your day's going. So
right, which I mean, it could take 5 minutes, it could take 30 minutes. Do we have any idea?
You could do it throughout your day. So after you go to a meeting, how long did the meeting take? You can quickly put it into Google Calendar because it's pretty quick and accessible. So that's one way to do it, or you could do it at the end of the day. Overall, that shouldn't increase expenses a whole lot for administration to just put that information in, and it's pretty subjective, so it's not going to be, you know, perfect, but
yeah,
you know.
But as, like you said, as a team to collaborate to come up with like a uniform system, and sort of, like you said, it's not going to be perfect, but kind of general consensus of different categories of where our time is spent, so that, yeah, maybe it's just a matter of clicking a box on a form at the end of the day, or filling out, maybe.
Possible.
Yeah, this was really good and really helpful, because I think a lot of times it's like we're pulled in a lot of different directions in supporting staff and supporting classrooms, or this teacher has this problem, and that doesn't really show up, and so we don't get like approval, or you know, we don't get
appreciation for it.
Yeah,
well.
like
That's one side
yeah,
of it,
appreciation or recognition.
Recognition.
So I think that if we did it where it's a Google, you know, in our calendar, and it was, you know, after you meet with such and such teacher who had questions about something or other, you know, open up your app and say from 10:15 to 10:30, I spoke with teacher, collaborate with teacher, you know, and you don't even have to put in the specifics of it, but just accounting for your time. That I think it would justify, you know. I had to do it for a whole year, so, you know, if we did it for a month, then maybe we'd be able to say. So, good job, Cody.
Yeah, good job. Thank you. This is awesome. Yeah, because I was thinking this is something